Sean shared his experience with his wife's infidelity with her boss, explaining how, despite his initial rage and desire to harm both of them, he ultimately found happiness while she lost everything. Though his story may sound like a tale of revenge, he clarifies that revenge wasn't his goal. "I'm Randy Clipson," he said, describing himself as an average guy who's not particularly handsome and struggled with weight issues for much of his life. Football became a significant turning point in high school, where his skills earned him the nickname Chipper, because if he chipped someone, they were going down. At 6 and 260 pounds, football seemed a natural fit, and although he wasn't a star athlete, his strong upper body helped him move defensive linemen effectively. Football became a transformative part of his high school years, helping him lose the weight he'd carried for most of his life. While he still had a bit of a belly, the muscle he'd built more than compensated. However, his self-image as a fatty remained, rooted in years of teasing about his weight during grade and middle school. In high school, his role as a football player protected him from bullying, bringing new social privileges and no longer making him a social outcast with girls. While he didn't attract cheerleaders, some girls were willing to date him. He wasn't active in dating until his senior year when he met Cindy. Cindy Crawley, who transferred to their school in the latter half of his junior year, first caught his eye in his senior year. Although Cindy had the most beautiful face he'd ever seen, she was about 30 to 40 pounds overweight, deterring most boys, including him at first. Their bond grew when they became lab partners in chemistry, a subject he struggled with but Cindy excelled in, helping him succeed. He credited her support in chemistry with enabling his journey to college. As they worked together, he discovered Cindy's humor and kindness and found they shared a common background, having both started school late. Cindy, who had overcome a congenital heart defect, and he, held back a year by his parents, were both 19. Summoning all his courage, he asked her out, understanding her initial skepticism due to her difficult past. Despite her reservations, she agreed to a date. They went to the movies and for ice cream afterward, and while his shyness stopped him from attempting a kiss, he shook her hand and asked if he could call her. Her thrilled response led to more dates in the coming weeks, and by their third date, he finally kissed her cheek, progressing to more affection over time. Meanwhile, his budding romance continued as the football season took an unexpected turn. Although Cavern High wasn't known for its football reputation, this season everything fell into place. Their standout quarterback, Kirk Simmons, led the team with the Bailey twins, Todd and Jason, as running backs. Positioned as the left tackle, Sean successfully protected Kirk's blind side. They lost their first game to Mohawk High, a dominant team, with a score of 2-17, but went on to win 7 games in a row, making it to the regionals. Although they lost the state finals 2-4 to Towson High, their victory over Mohawk High in the semifinals, with a score of 3-7, was a highlight. He apologized for getting caught up in reliving his high school football glory days. Meanwhile, his relationship with Cindy progressed, and as prom season approached, he asked her to go with him. She joyfully accepted with a big kiss. Over the following 4 weeks, Cindy followed a crash diet, losing about 20 pounds to fit into her prom dress. When he picked her up for prom, he was stunned by how beautiful she looked. Though Cindy might not fit the ideal look most guys would prefer, he thought she looked amazing. Cindy's full figure, emphasized in her light blue dress, made her even more attractive to him. They spent the evening dancing, and at the end of the night he suggested parking. However, Cindy had a different plan, guiding him to a small cabin about 30 miles from town. Cindy explained that the cabin, used by her uncle for hunting, was simple, with only a small kitchen, a couch, a bed, and a bathroom. They started on the couch, laughing and having fun, and the night ended on a high note. Despite their activities, he made sure Cindy got home 15 minutes before her 2 a.m. curfew. Their relationship grew closer through the remainder of high school, and they began a physical relationship, using protection each time. After graduation, he received a partial football scholarship to a Division I school in another state, while Cindy chose to attend a local community college. His major was computer science, and hers was psychology. Knowing he would be leaving, they discussed their future together and mutually agreed to part ways, believing it was unfair to each other to stay committed. It was the hardest choice he had ever made, and the pain of leaving Cindy behind weighed heavily on him. She had assured him that if they were meant to be, things would work out in the future. Heartbroken, he considered going home but reminded himself of his commitment to the university and his dream of a college education, which kept him determined. He decided to channel his energy into his studies and football, filling his time completely to keep his mind occupied. Although his coach advised him to ease up, his dedication impressed both coaches and teachers. Taking a full course load and playing college football, he continued shedding fat and building muscle through intensive training, which boosted his strength in both his upper and lower body. With only a partial scholarship, my parents had to cover the remaining balance, even though I was aware of the financial strain it placed on them. Playing football left me unable to contribute financially, and since I didn't have funds to return home, I made sure to call Cindy weekly. She seemed as devastated by our separation as I was. My first year of college went well, and I succeeded in both football and academics. By the third game of the season, I secured a position in the starting lineup, moving to play left guard due to my slower speed. My increased strength was an asset, helping us achieve an 8-2 season record. Academically, I ended the year on the dean's list, which delighted my parents. Over the summer, Cindy and I reconnected and resumed our relationship. I believed I was deeply in love with her, or so it seemed at the time. Reflecting on it now, I've questioned whether it was truly love or mere lust. After careful thought, I leaned toward believing it was love, as a small part of me still holds some affection for her. That summer, I worked and took 3 online courses, determined to complete college as quickly as possible. Cindy and I also resumed our physical relationship, exploring each other's bodies whenever we had the chance. I completed my college education in 3 years and married Cindy immediately after graduation. We both found jobs at Tri-Orbit Electronics, a multinational software and electronics company based in Virginia. I worked in software development, while Cindy worked in human resources. After saving enough money, we bought a small house and started talking about having children. The first 3.5 years of our marriage were wonderful. With only one downside, we both gained a lot of weight. Cindy's weight reached 230 pounds, and mine climbed to 310. I carried the weight better due to my height, but neither of us was happy with the extra pounds, despite trying multiple diets without success. My love for Cindy was unwavering, no matter her size. After 3 years of marriage and no children, we decided to consult our family doctor. A series of tests showed no problems with either of us, but the doctor suggested that weight loss might improve Cindy's chances of conceiving. For the first time, we committed to a strict diet. After 6 months, Cindy lost 50 pounds while I lost only around 25, though I'll admit I cheated more often than I should have. Cindy's weight loss was noticeable and began attracting attention from other men. Along with dieting, Cindy started going to the gym 5 days a week. Seeing her transformation, I realized I needed to increase my efforts, so I stuck to the diet and started joining her at the gym. By the end of a year of dieting, Cindy had lost 80 pounds, and I had lost 90. We both felt great about our progress, but sadly, her weight loss would eventually lead to heartbreak for me. As Cindy continued to lose weight, she began wearing more revealing outfits. At first, I found this appealing, but over time, I became uncomfortable when I overheard comments about her at work. However, I refrained from saying anything because Cindy, who had always felt like the ugly duckling, was now blossoming into a beautiful swan. My real concern started when Kirk Simmons was promoted to head of human resources, making him Cindy's boss and placing him 2 levels above me, as I was just a senior programmer. At first, I didn't think much of it. Kirk was married to Susie Looper, who had been a cheerleader in high school and still looked attractive. I had seen her at company events, and at the Christmas party, I ended up dancing with her at Cindy's request while she danced with her boss. I danced with Susie a few times while Kirk danced with Cindy close by. I found myself noticing Susie, but I thought little of it since I was still in my 20s, and any pretty girl could get a reaction from me. I was pleasantly surprised to find she wasn't stuck up, which I appreciated. When Kirk arrived, Susie complimented us, saying we looked fantastic. My view of Cindy's beauty had always been high, but now she was genuinely stunning. Somewhat embarrassed, I mentioned that someone should keep an eye on her, to which Susie replied with a simple thank you, and I thanked her for her kindness. Susie blushed in response. As the night ended, about 5 months before our 4th anniversary, Cindy informed me of a significant decision. She had chosen to resume taking birth control pills. I objected, asking about our plans to have children, to which she replied bluntly, saying, "We can still have kids, I just don't want to get fat again. I want to enjoy being slim for a while." In hindsight, I realize I should have seen this as a red flag, but I was completely unaware of what was happening, trusting Cindy fully. Unfortunately, my trust in Kirk was unfounded, as he was doing everything he could to win Cindy over. Cindy, naturally, felt flattered that the former high school football captain was interested in her. My first real concerns surfaced when Cindy started working late and supposedly going out with friends. I was clueless, but not stupid. When Cindy started coming home later and later, I grew suspicious. I didn't want to believe she was cheating, but I couldn't ignore the signs. I hired a private investigator, and within a week, he had all the proof I needed. The investigator captured video footage of Cindy and Kirk engaging in intimate acts in the office. How they obtained this, I don't know. There were also photos of them looking affectionate during dinner, and video of Kirk visiting our house while I was at work. Finally, there were images of them being intimate on our living room floor, taken through the front window. Remember how I said that I couldn't describe what it was like to be close to Cindy for the first time? Well, I can't even begin to explain the pain I felt when I discovered my wife was cheating on me. Not only was she unfaithful, but she was cheating with someone I'd considered a friend, even if we weren't particularly close. The pain was indescribable. Even then, I held on to the hope that confronting Cindy might make her realize her mistake. I loved her deeply and believed she still loved me. That night, I brought the evidence home, and after dinner, I told Cindy we needed to talk. She looked at me with a puzzled expression but sat down at the kitchen table to listen. When I showed her the evidence, she went pale, then covered her face with her hands and began crying. She ran to the bathroom, and I went to the door, knocking, but she refused to let me in. I waited in the kitchen, sipping a glass of rum. Finally, she emerged and sat at the table, her head lowered. I spoke coolly, asking what her friend had to say. She whispered, explaining that she hadn't meant for it to happen. Cindy frowned, remarking that I didn't need to be crude, and suggested that maybe if I paid more attention to her, things would have turned out differently. Momentarily stunned, I considered whether I'd indeed neglected her, but my anger flared up again, and I made it clear she shouldn't try to shift the blame onto me. I declared my innocence and pressed her to explain her actions, asking why she had the affair. She nervously looked at me but stayed silent. I insisted, wanting to know what she planned to do next, struggling to contain my anger. Trying to rein in my emotions, I asked if she wanted to be with Kirk or with me. Through her tears, she confessed her love for me, but admitted she also loved Kirk. I told her she needed to make a decision, almost biting my tongue to control my rage. I set a deadline, saying she had until the next day to choose. If she wanted to stay with me, she would have to cut off contact with Kirk, quit her job, and commit to going to counseling. Cindy agreed to this, and later I gathered all her belongings, placed them in the hallway, and told her she could sleep in the guest room until she made up her mind. The following day, I left work early, unable to concentrate and feeling useless. My stomach churned all day, and at one point, I nearly lost the little breakfast I'd eaten. Around 6 p.m., Cindy came in, looking extremely nervous. I was sitting at the kitchen table, as I had the previous night. She took a seat across from me, and I demanded to know if she'd made her decision. Tears ran down her face as she professed her love for me, but admitted she couldn't give up Kirk, saying she loved him too. I sighed deeply, struggling to hide my heartbreak, acknowledging her choice. She nodded silently, and I felt a pain as intense as a knife to the chest. My mind raced, torn between wanting to lash out and wanting to crawl into a corner and cry. I sarcastically commented that she'd chosen a real winner, bringing up Kirk and Susie's newborn son, asking if it didn't bother her to leave a child without a father. Anger and shame flickered across Cindy's face as she told me Kirk had planned to divorce Susie before their affair started. I continued, asking if she was really willing to throw away nearly 4 years of marriage so easily, fighting to hold back my anger and tears while trying to understand her choice. To be honest, I was tempted right then to lash out physically at Cindy and go after Kirk next. She softly expressed her regret for causing any pain, her tone tender. She clarified that she hadn't planned for things to turn out this way, but had truly fallen in love with Kirk, and he felt the same. Despite my intense urge to hurt her in that moment, I realized I needed to stay in control. It took every ounce of self-discipline, but I managed it. A logical part of my mind reminded me that violence wouldn't solve anything. I didn't let her see the depth of my hurt and refused to plead with her. To stay begging felt like the ultimate defeat for a betrayed husband. I simply said that if she wanted a divorce, she could have it. Her expression turned confused, maybe with a trace of hurt, as if she'd expected me to fight for her. But I knew that if she decided to leave, nothing I could say would stop her. Cindy seemed surprised by my reaction, but she got up and started packing her things. The next day, I visited the bank and our financial advisor, explaining the situation and withdrawing half of the funds from each account. I set up new accounts solely in my name, canceled our joint credit cards, and applied for new ones under my name alone. I also listed our house for sale through a realtor friend and finally met with a divorce lawyer. My heart was filled with bitterness, and I made sure Cindy was served at work, citing infidelity as the cause. The divorce process was relatively simple with only about 4 years of marriage and no kids. There wasn't much to argue over. We split everything evenly and went our separate ways. Kirk's divorce, however, was messier as it involved a baby under a year old and Susie, who had never worked. He was on the hook for both child support and alimony. One part of Kirk's divorce that admittedly brought me some satisfaction was his choice to save on legal fees, which led to his agreeing to a 15-year spousal support term instead of limiting it to a year or two. Kirk wasn't happy, but he signed the papers anyway. 2 months after both divorces were finalized, Kirk and Cindy got married, which was a tough reality for me to accept. The first week after the breakup left me completely lost. Not being much of a drinker, alcohol didn't appeal to me, but for weeks I was obsessed with thoughts of revenge. I think every man who's been cheated on can understand that feeling. I even started searching online for stories about ex-husbands who got back at their former wives and lovers. It took me to a dark place, and I ended up buying a weapon. But as I read more and more about people seeking revenge, my outlook started to shift. Initially, my thoughts centered around violence, but then I considered sabotaging their belongings, thinking about ideas like slashing all their tires, putting sugar in their gas tanks, flooding their house, and other impractical schemes. The more stories I read, the more I saw the futility in most of these ideas, realizing there was no way to achieve the revenge I craved. Eventually, I sought guidance from my church's counselor. The pastor spent nearly 2 hours explaining that revenge wouldn't ease the pain caused by my wife's betrayal. No matter how much I hurt my ex-wife or her new husband, the emotional wound would remain. Though his advice seemed simple, given my pain, he emphasized that only time and distance would heal my heart. While I was initially doubtful, I had to admit that being near Cindy without being able to be with her would keep the hurt fresh. I also accepted the truth in what the pastor said about revenge, that it wouldn't take away my pain. I decided to take his advice, creating the space between Cindy and me that he recommended. An opportunity arose when I heard rumors that our company was facing financial trouble. Apparently, we had secured a government contract with the Defense Department, one that promised substantial profit. But there was a risk involved. We were tasked with developing a new software and electronics package for Air Force fighter jets and bombers. The project was highly classified, so I can't share specifics, but it aimed to give the U.S. a strategic edge over Russia and China if we succeeded. The rumor going around was that the project was seriously behind schedule and over budget, unlike most typical government contracts. The potential profits were immense, but the project posed huge risks. Unlike typical government contracts, there would be no interim payments while developing the software and electronics, and severe penalties awaited if we failed to deliver on time. In the worst case, the company could face bankruptcy if we didn't meet the contract terms. As one of the senior software designers, I was called in to help tackle the impending crisis. Most of the other designers were reluctant to get involved, updating their resumes and thinking about leaving. Taking on this project meant risking termination and possible company collapse, with a failure that would likely stick with us for years. After my divorce, my basic needs were simpler, so the threat of losing my job didn't weigh as heavily. However, learning that Cindy was pregnant stirred emotions in me, as I'd always imagined having a family with her. As I evaluated the project data, it was evident the current approach wouldn't work. Despite the dangers, I chose to take on the project, heading to California and putting about 3,000 miles between my ex-wife and me. Like my first year of college, I immersed myself in work, enduring grueling days that sometimes stretched to 20 hours, leaving no room to dwell on Cindy. I let go of 34 programmers and all engineers involved in the electronic components, bringing in new talent. Despite the tight 11-month deadline, I scrapped their progress, choosing to rely on the skills of the fresh engineers I'd brought on, including some from competitor companies. Their initial skepticism turned to awe as I outlined my vision for the components and why I had chosen a specific design. The real challenge lay in getting the software to function properly. Over time, we crafted a program I had faith in. Only 3 weeks before our scheduled delivery to the military, I finally felt confident we'd succeed. The first test integrating our software with the hardware showed a 96% success rate. The remaining 4% was easy to resolve after identifying minor issues. The success of our program caused the company's stock to surge by over 300 points in just a few months. Soon after, the Defense Department expanded our contract to include the Navy, Army, and Marines, projecting billions in potential earnings. Our success didn't stop there. I realized we could modify the program for commercial purposes, so we removed all classified details and created an impressive platform with widespread practical applications. The potential uses seemed endless. Following this success, I was promoted to Senior Vice President and tasked with developing commercial applications for the program. In the years that followed, my trips back to the Virginia headquarters never resulted in encounters with Kirk or Cindy. Although I didn't expect any emotional impact, I preferred avoiding any contact, having nothing more to say to either of them. The pastor's advice on creating time and distance between heartbreak proved entirely correct. I had moved on. On one of my visits, I unexpectedly bumped into Kelly Bailey, a former cheerleader from Cavern High and Susie's best friend. I knew she had married Jason Bailey and had a son. Before I met Cindy, I'd always had a crush on Kelly, who was the most beautiful cheerleader in high school. Kelly had a warm and friendly nature that made her hard not to like. Though she had aged somewhat, she remained attractive. Unlike Cindy, who was shorter, with blonde hair and a full figure, Kelly stood barely 5'8", had long black hair, and a smaller build. The one similarity they shared was a warm smile. I was surprised she recognized me in the grocery store, where I was preparing for a board presentation. Despite my few gray hairs and wrinkles, I still harbored a slight crush. Kelly called out to me as I browsed the frozen dinners. When I recognized her voice, I blushed slightly. She parked her cart beside mine, and I greeted her, feeling flattered she remembered me. She admitted that she wouldn't have noticed me if Susie hadn't pointed me out over lunch at Tri-Orbit. I was surprised and told her so. She then revealed with a smile that she'd been working in Tri-Orbit's marketing department for about 6 years. Learning Kelly worked at my company surprised me, and I felt a bit guilty for not knowing. But since I didn't interact with the marketing team much, it wasn't entirely my fault, even though I still felt I should have been aware. To ease the awkwardness, I asked how she was doing. She replied, as well as can be expected with a hint of sadness. She then told me she was divorced, explaining that Jason had turned out to be unfaithful, cheating with his secretary and several other women, even getting one of them pregnant. She had divorced him, but he faced little consequence for his actions. With similar salaries, there was no alimony, and their limited savings and lack of property made things simple. All he was ordered to pay was child support, though she had to chase him every month to get it. I don't mind pestering him for the money, but it infuriates me how he completely ignores our son, Scott, she said. I apologized, expressing regret over Jason's behavior. I admitted I'd always known Jason had a wild side, but had hoped he'd settle down after marriage. Pausing, I looked into Kelly's emerald green eyes, uncertain what to say next. Finally, I shared that Cindy and I had also divorced, mentioning that she'd chosen to be with someone else. Kelly shook her head with a small laugh, saying, "No, Randy. It was Kirk who pursued Cindy. Susie told me everything." "I guess I can't argue with that," I replied. "But it takes two to tango." She noticed my cart and joked, "You're not seriously considering these frozen dinners. Are you glancing at the items?" I nodded, admitting, "I'm a terrible cook. This is about all I can manage." She smiled and offered, "If you'd like a home-cooked meal, why don't you come over to my place? It won't be anything fancy, but I promise it'll taste good." I hesitated initially, but couldn't resist the thought of a real meal. I said I'd love a home-cooked meal if it wasn't too much trouble, confessing I couldn't remember the last time I'd had one. That evening turned out to be wonderful. Kelly prepared meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and sherbet for dessert. It felt nice to share a meal and have someone to talk to. Scott, whom Kelly affectionately called Scotty, was an energetic and friendly child. I found out that he was a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, just like me. We had a great time discussing the team and their potential for the upcoming season. I was a devoted fan and a season ticket holder. In fact, I had 4 seats right on the 50-yard line, which the company covered so I could bring prospective clients to the games. When I didn't have clients, I'd invite friends, and if no one was available, I'd go solo and usually give away the other 3 tickets to people trying to buy from scalpers. Scotty, sounding wistful, said he'd love to go to a game one day. I impulsively offered to make that happen, and only after saying it did I realize I might have overstepped. I quickly added, "That is, of course, if your mom agrees." Scotty looked at his mom with pleading eyes, and she just replied, "We'll discuss it later." Feeling a bit awkward, I apologized. "Sorry about the Buccaneers offer, I didn't mean to blurt it out. Just so you know though, I do have 4 season tickets to all the home games and plenty of frequent flyer miles. If you're okay with him going, I'd be delighted to take him." Kelly looked at me intently, and I realized I'd made another slip up. I tried to correct myself again, only to make it worse by adding that she could come too. I offered to book separate rooms, one for her and Scotty and another for myself. Kelly chuckled, calling me the sweetest man and saying my flustered expression was priceless. Relieved, I sighed, as I didn't want to offend her. I enjoyed her company and hoped we'd meet again. I decided to take a chance and said, "Would you mind if I asked you out when I'm in town? If you're seeing someone, I'll understand. I just really enjoyed having someone to talk to." Kelly looked at me, then smiled. "Randy, I've known you since high school. I always thought you were cute and one of the nicest guys, but I was with Jason then. Now that I've gotten to know you again, yes, I'd love for you to call me, and I'd be thrilled to go see the Buccaneers with you and Scotty." Over the next year, I called Kelly every time I came back to Virginia, and we met up frequently. I even booked trips east when it wasn't necessary just to see her. At first, it wasn't a romantic relationship, we were just friends who enjoyed each other's company. I took Kelly and Scotty to the season's final game, which the Bucs needed to win to make the playoffs, and they did. Scotty was ecstatic, celebrating the victory. That night, after Scotty went to bed, Kelly came to my room, and our friendship turned into something more. Kelly knocked on my door unexpectedly while I was watching a local sports recap of the Bucs game. Worried, I asked if everything was all right, especially with Scotty. Smiling, she assured me he was sound asleep and shared that she wanted to have a drink and chat. Standing there in my boxer shorts and t-shirt, I mentioned I'd need to find some pants before inviting her in. However, when I looked for them, I realized they weren't where I thought I'd left them. Kelly laughed, saying there was no need for pants as she pushed the door open and came in. Embarrassed, I kept searching for my pants, which made her laugh more. Then, she suggested leveling the playing field if I was uncomfortable and removed her skirt, leaving us both in our underwear. She smiled, asking me to make her a drink and join her. I went to the mini bar, grabbed 2 bottles of rum and 2 cans of Coke, and mixed us drinks. As I handed Kelly her drink, she climbed onto my bed, sitting cross-legged in her white lace underwear, catching my eye. After giving her the drink, I looked around for a place to sit. Kelly, noticing my hesitation, patted the bed beside her, assuring me with a grin that she wouldn't bite. Still embarrassed, I joined her, taking a big gulp of my drink, which helped me relax as the rum kicked in. We chatted for a while, and when we finished, I asked if she wanted another. She shook her head, and I expected her to head back to her son. But to my surprise, she didn't leave. Unsure what to do, I put our cups in the trash and sat back down. At that moment, Kelly leaned in and gave me a gentle kiss. It was quick and soft, sending an electric jolt through me. Seeing my surprise, she smiled and said, "I've waited months for you to kiss me. I figured you still saw me as that unattainable high school cheerleader. Well, I'm not that girl anymore." Kelly had read me perfectly. There were so many times I'd wanted to kiss her but held back, fearing I'd lose her as a friend. Finally, I leaned forward and kissed her, our kiss growing more passionate as we explored each other's mouths. She tasted sweet, and after we parted, I told her how beautiful and amazing she was. Smiling, Kelly laid her head on my chest, and that night was more passionate than my first time with Cindy. 6 months later, Kelly and I were engaged, and Scotty was thrilled that I would be his dad. A year after that, we got married. Jason, as Kelly had warned, continued to be a jerk. He barely spoke to Scotty and openly resented me. He remained close friends with Kirk, and every time he came by Kelly's place while I was there, he made a point to talk about how happy he was with Cindy and how great their intimacy was, as if he thought it would make me envious. I simply listened in silence. I learned that Kirk was still in charge of the Human Resources Department, while Cindy had left her job to be a stay-at-home mom. I was slightly surprised to hear they now had 3 children, though it no longer bothered me in the slightest. Once, I overheard Kelly on the phone, berating Jason for missing the child support payment, and I mistakenly suggested that she let it go. I'd happily cover anything Scotty needed. Kelly quickly corrected me, firmly stating that I should stay out of it. She was determined not to let Jason avoid his responsibility, despite his neglect. I immediately withdrew my comment, acknowledging that the money rightfully belonged to Scotty. In December, I was set to be announced as executive vice president of the company, with the formal announcement planned for the Christmas party at the Washington Convention Center, expected to draw around 400 to 500 guests. Though I felt a bit uncomfortable with all the attention, Kelly was ecstatic, playfully scolding me for complaining and insisting I deserved the recognition. I know almost as many people in that company as you do, and they've shared countless stories about how the company wouldn't be here if not for you. They also think you'll be the next CEO when Mel steps down next year, she added with a smile. I shrugged, saying that it might not matter. She responded with a proud smile and then surprised me with some exciting news. Recalling an incident in Kansas City involving a mishap with a rubber, I grinned sheepishly. She confirmed my thoughts, revealing she was pregnant and expressing her happiness at having me close. Holding me tightly, she admitted that if we didn't have to attend the party, she'd rather spend the night together at home. I confessed that parties had lost their appeal for me, having attended so many that they no longer felt special. Kelly, however, still enjoyed them, especially when I accompanied her. We danced for a while before we ran into Kirk and Cindy, who were with Jason and his date, Kathy. I was genuinely taken aback to see that Cindy had gained weight, and even Kirk had developed a noticeable belly, while Jason was still in great shape. I speculated he might still be chasing romantic interests. Unsure how to react, I was saved by an announcement on the PA system. Could I have your attention for just a moment? It was Mel Stanton, the CEO of Tri-Orbit. I promise I won't make a long speech. As many of you know, we've been looking to replace Charlie Bruner, our executive vice president, who retired 3 months ago. I knew right away who I wanted for the position, but the board took their time. Finally, after interviewing dozens of candidates, they agreed with me. I'm excited to announce that our new executive vice president comes from within our own company. He has always been a valuable asset, and it's time he's properly rewarded. I present to you our new executive vice president, Randy Clipson. A spotlight illuminated me, and the room erupted in applause. Kelly pulled me in for a long, passionate kiss. Once the applause died down and the party resumed, I turned to where Kirk, Cindy, Jason, and Kathy were standing, unsure of what to say. Jason looked irritated, Kirk's face was clouded with jealousy, and Cindy's expression held sadness and regret. Unsure of what to do, I let Kelly take the lead as she warmly greeted Kirk, Cindy, and Jason, hugging each of them in turn. She then extended a polite handshake to Kathy, expressing her pleasure in meeting her. Following her example, I shook hands with Kirk, Jason, and Kathy and gave Cindy a brief hug. We exchanged pleasantries, and then the music resumed. In an unexpected move, Kelly turned to me and said, "Randy, why don't you dance with Cindy? I'll dance with my ex-husband, and Kathy, why don't you dance with Kirk?" I looked at Kelly, slightly confused, but she just smiled knowingly. So I danced with Cindy. Searching for words, I asked how she and Kirk were doing. She admitted that things weren't going well and mentioned that she suspected they were heading toward a divorce, as she believed Kirk had been unfaithful. Genuinely sympathetic, I told her I was sorry to hear that. Cindy responded with a hint of skepticism, asking if I truly meant it or if I'd expected her to get what she deserved. At first, I was shocked by her question, assuring her that I'd never say such a thing. Then, I paused, realizing that there was a time when I probably would have. To be honest, when we first broke up, I might have said something like that. But I never hated you, Cindy. You were my first love, and losing you hurt. But life moves on, and so have I. Shortly after, the music stopped, and tears started to stream down Cindy's face. She admitted that leaving me had been the biggest mistake of her life and lamented that there was nothing she could do to change it. Watching her walk away, I felt genuine sympathy. Kelly wrapped her arm around me, and I leaned down to kiss her. I asked how her dance with Jason had gone, and with a smile, she said, "He's still the same idiot. He even tried to flirt with me, saying he's ready to settle down and would be more than willing to take me back." I just laughed and told him why on earth would I go back to him when I have the most wonderful man in the world. I looked over to see Cindy seated at their table, her face wet with tears. From where I stood, it looked like Kirk and Jason were having a heated exchange. If I had to guess, I'd say Kirk might have tried making a move on Jason's date, Kathy. I reflected on the pain I had felt when Cindy left me. It was a wound that never truly healed, like a deep cut that leaves a scar. I thought back to those days when I was consumed by thoughts of revenge. The pastor had been right. No amount of revenge could have eased my pain. Only time and distance had truly healed me. As I said at the beginning, though I had abandoned my plans for revenge, in a way, I had achieved it. My true revenge was in living a happy, fulfilled life, loved and content.